Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that I love them very much. And I'm so sorry, babe. I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
Hi, welcome to the Tracy's Mayor Benefit 2021 20th Anniversary Tribute to 9/11. 20 years ago shook our world and changed our lives forever. The way that we travel, the way that we do many business, because of a terrorist attack here in our own land by commercial airplanes that we travel on every day. It was so unexpected. I remember that morning watching footage on the news about an airplane hitting the Twin Tower. And we watched the footage, we saw another plane go into the second tower. And in that moment, we knew that this was no accident. And then later we saw another plane had gone into the Pentagon. And then another plane had gone down in Pennsylvania, not knowing where that target was intended, whether it was the Capitol or the White House or whatever. We knew that it was all bad and that we were at war. Because I lived in Northern California near San Francisco and my family lived in Southern California near Los Angeles, we didn't know if we would be targets at any moment. I remember that day ushered in a level of fear, and it ushered in a level of hatred and prejudice as I had not seen before. I remember in the coming days, it was all kind of things on the news talking about rounding up people that were mistaken for terrorists because of what they wore, because of their religion, because of what they looked like. I remember being afraid for friends and family that went to Ground Zero to help with rescue efforts, not knowing if the buildings could sustain them, if they would be hurt. Remember that day, the story that was told of two friends that were on their way to take their kids to Disneyland, and one couldn't make it on the plane with the other, so they took two different planes from New York to go to Los Angeles to meet up. But then both of those planes were the ones that hit the Twin Towers, and neither family made it to Disneyland nor made it home. That was so tragic. What did we do from there? What do we do now, 20 years later? There's still so much disunity, so much prejudice. We have to realize that terrorism is a mindset. It's not a religion. It's not a person. It's not the way they look. It's not the way that they dress. But we can build unity by finding things that we have in common and build our communities together. So now I want you to listen to a few stories that we have for you today that will help shed some light on things that happened that day and where we can go from here. I hope that you learn as we all learn together. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Emmanuel Lipscomb. I'm a rescuer and survivor of the World Trade Ground Zero attack on September 11, 2001. I know there's not been much that's been said about the civilians and most things are said about the first responders. But today I want to tell you about a special group of people that were there with me through the beginning of the attack and stayed while others were fleeing through the rest of the attack. And they helped clear the streets and they helped other people get to safety through the buildings and through the streets so that they would not be in the way of the police and fire and rescue workers that we were waiting to see to come. I know it seems like this was all just like a desperate moment, but it wasn't a desperate moment. It wasn't a moment as terrorists had planned that was going to take us to fear. It was a moment that the citizens of America, the people of America, that knew that it was going to take a while before the police and rescue workers got there, that we had to do our part. There were 50,000 people normally at the World Trade at that time of day. And we just had to make sure that as many civilians and many people as possible that could get to safety got to safety. So each of us just took our own mission that we knew that we had to do in our hearts. And we joined together and we refused to leave. We refused to run away. We refused to let our brothers and our sisters die in this towering inferno that was starting to build. We rescued a lot of people. We carried a lot of people through a lot of places, and ultimately when the police and rescue workers got there, They put us in a safe area directly underneath the tower. And it was in that moment that the tower fell. And we looked up and saw the tower coming down on top of our heads. I turned, and the man next to me turned, and we ran. I jumped in a hole in the side of the wall. He got hit. And within a second, all of those people that were refusing to leave to save someone else, they, along with the police, rescue workers, and fire workers that had come, they all died from, it was like a tsunami of fire and steel and concrete that came rolling from above and up the street from behind us. And in an instant, everything was quiet. There were no more sirens going. There were no more voices being scared. There were no screams. There were nothing happening, but just a stillness and quietness of a black death of incinerated people and buildings. We lived through that day, through many different things. I remained at the World Trade at Ground Zero for several hours after I found air in the basement of a building and other people. But we survived. And if there's any message that we have from that day, it's that message that Robert Kennedy gave us, that none of us may do that one miraculous thing that changes the entire world. But if we take what each and every one of us can do, all those little parts to just make life better, forget about the politics, forget about the racism, forget about the discrimination, forget about the bias, forget about everything. But we realize that even today, just like we did in that day, we stand in the midst of an attack, of an economic attack, of a health pandemic attack, of a homelessness attack, of attacks of food shortages, of natural disasters, and so many things that could lead to death to so many people or harm to so many people, that just as they did in that day, we've got to come in the spirit of what we do. And we've got to help make this America, this United States, this globe, this world a safer place for us all to be. So I'm asking you today to think of the World Trade attack not as a moment of disparity, not as a moment of hardship, but a moment of courage and a moment of sacrifice, where we were all willing to come together, forgetting our biases, and just clearly do that work that needed to be done to build and save greater life upon this earth. God bless you. I just love you so much. And we need you too, to not just remember the first responders, but remember, I call them the good shepherds, the minute persons that were there in that attack, and how they helped save so many lives. God bless you.
Hello, my name is Randall Bradley, and I'm the Fire Chief of the South San Joaquin County Fire Authority, which provides fire protection to the city of Tracy and the surrounding communities. Today, as I reflect back on the events of 9/11, I have vivid memories of that day and that morning. The night before, our firefighters had responded to a third alarm apartment fire, and they were up most of the night, and then we received a request for resources to Calaveras County, and we needed to send strike teams, and I was coordinating that response. And while sitting on the side of I-580 waiting for additional fire engines to arrive to send to Calaveras County, we came across the radio that airplanes had struck the World Trade Center towers. And of course, you remember that moment, you remember how you felt, and how concerned and still having to do our jobs and send those resources to the big fires, and just reflecting back on that and reflecting on what occurred and how it changed our lives. I think about what we can do to honor those who gave their lives that day, and to honor those who've given their lives since then, protecting our freedoms because of that day. And I think that the best way we can do that is truly by being good Americans, and by taking care of each other and showing each other dignity and respect. And I remember, the days and weeks and months after that event, that we came together as a country, and we were united, and it was important to be good Americans. And so, as I reflect back, I think that we could, try to remember that, and maybe try as we honor the 20th anniversary of that event, that maybe we can use that as maybe a catalyst to again concentrate and focus on being good Americans and united and taking care of each other. Thank you.
It's been 20 years since the 9/11 incident. How do you see it affecting our society today?
I think it's made us more aware. It's broadened our perspective. We, at least from a law enforcement perspective, at the time of the incident, we were really focused on general crimes, on prevention, intervention, enforcement efforts to deal with local crimes. I think it broadened our perspective in the sense that we started communicating. There was interjurisdictional communication between municipal, local, federal, state, countrywide on potential threat hazards. We started talking about things like counterterrorism and active shooter and threat assessments, things that we weren't really dialoguing before. Training changed. We started preparing for the what ifs. If this were to happen in our jurisdiction, what would we do? Who would we communicate with? We had better communication with our federal FBI partners, our other Bureau of Drug Enforcement, the DEA, and so in the ATF, so that we would not be caught off guard. So I think we have done a better job creating even joint units like JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force. Most departments have those now. That wasn't really a thing back, pre 9/11. So it taught us to communicate better, so we can be more prepared, and it's enhanced our training. I think we've done a better job thinking outside the box when it comes to how do we prepare for something like this, especially if you have a city where you have an airport or a port or mass public transit. How do you deal with those threats? Do you have the tools? Are you utilizing technology to the best of its capabilities to help combat a situation like that?
Tell us about a story when you went to New York after 9/11.
Yeah, so again, having been raised in Brooklyn, I remember how iconic the towers were. And fast forward to today, now I'm a law enforcement practitioner. I've had the opportunity to visit World Trade Center, and it's entirely different. It's a whole different, more modernized look. It was impactful because it's a memorial now. I had the opportunity to actually go into the building and actually sign the walls up on the 80-some-odd floor with a group of colleagues from the FBI National Academy. And what an experience that was, to be at ground zero where such a tragic event occurred. It was really, really memorable to me, and really put into perspective the gravity of what happened that day. It was so much devastation and loss of life. It's just hard to fathom that something like that could be happening. That kind of evil would be in the world. But it'll forever touch me. And I think every member of law enforcement, as well as fire, public safety, that responded there, gave their lives for such a noble cause. We thank them. We thank each and every one of the NYPD members of public safety and fire for their sacrifice on that day.
Hi, I just want to share a memoir of one of my nephews. I'm a retired Army veteran. There are a lot of things I remember about 9/11. Just 5 days prior, I had been promoted in front of the Hall of Heroes section within the Pentagon with family and friends in attendance. That Sunday before September the 9th, 2001, I had just purchased my first cell phone due to having small kids who were in on-post daycare. I wanted to ensure I could always be reached in case something happened. The day prior, I recall sitting in the office talking to a coworker When we could see outside the window that evening as an airplane flew over our side of the building headed towards Reagan National Airport. Our side of the building happened to be one of the flight patterns into the airport. We both mentioned that the plane seemed really low that night, and it would be devastating if it had hit us with all the leadership we had on that particular side of the building. The day of 9/11, I walked into the building with a friend of mine that had just been at my promotion ceremony the Thursday prior. I can still see her carrying her bags. We talked about her getting a new position and where she would be working. I told her I would come see her and check out her space. That morning I was working a trip and went to talk to the military air section. The news was on in their area as it was mentioned the first tower had been hit, but they wasn't sure if it was a plane or not. I remember thinking that there are too many high buildings in New York for that to happen. It must have been a small engine plane that crashed by accident. I went to the office next door as I waited for the lady to get off the phone so that I could coordinate what I needed done. Shortly after that, they came into the office stating they had just seen the second plane hit the other tower. I ran back to my office to ensure the TV was on and everyone in my section knew what was happening on the news with the Twin Towers. I looked up at the clock in our office and noticed it was approximately 9:30 a.m. I proceeded back to the office I had just left to continue working my flight requests for military air, which was close to my friend's office, the site of impact. As I sat in the office, I recall thinking to myself about what had just transpired with everyone within the towers, thinking it's too high to get a fire ladder to them. How quickly could helicopters get to the rooftop to possibly help evacuate people? Are we under attack? Because it's early in the morning when most people are just getting to work. Just as I finished the statement in my head, I wondered what's next. A ball of fire came around the corner from within the inner rings. I remember the window bellowing as the desk shifted in the office and everything snapped back in place just like an aftershock while being thrown up onto the desk. I ran back to my office to ensure things were good, not knowing what just happened. Immediately, we were told to evacuate the building. Due to where I worked, I stayed to ensure things were locked up as the phone started ringing off the hook. I remember my grandmother calling to ensure I was okay. My second shift soldier called and was wondering if she was to report for her shift early due to everything happening on the news, not knowing what had just happened at the Pentagon. I told her no and to stay home. I remember contacting my wife at the time to tell her to go get the kids out of daycare and go home. They all would be safer being we lived on post and government housing. Being we were just attacked at the Pentagon, I did not know what else was coming, but I knew it meant war. After 45 minutes passed from being in the building, I was finally able to get out of the building as smoke really started taking over our area, being we were close to the impact site. There were so many images of that day that were running through my head as I remember taking in all the images around me of what was happening. Once outside the building, cell phone communication was impossible. Did not get home until approximately 6:30 p.m. due to all the events that day at the Pentagon and traffic. A friend I was in basic training with and deployed to Desert Storm would just happen to call my house that day. He was trying to track me down since it had been years since our last contact. He had no idea of the events that were just happening, being that he was not aware of the news. I had another friend to call my house from overseas to ensure I was all right, being he knew I was working in the Pentagon. I remember being right back to work in the building the next morning around 6 o'clock a.m. while the building was still on fire. This happened for about 4 days as emergency personnel worked to put out the fire and to try to find remains. As weeks went by, it hit me one day while walking into the building to work as I looked up to see all the many food stations in the parking lot. People were working to help those working within the building as well as those working recovery. Everything from McDonald's, Taco Bell, Burger King, Outback Steakhouse, and many other vendors were giving out free meals. There were pallets of water with individuals giving out bottles to workers and volunteers. There were rows of phone booths for people to use to make phone calls. I was immediately overwhelmed to see such a sight. I'm used to seeing something like this in a third world country, not in our own backyard, let alone D.C., the nation's capital. I cried so hard for what was going on and all the lives lost as well as happy to see the individuals and how we all came together to help for a greater cause. There were everyday people just wanting to help, not just emergency personnel. For a long time, I had to deal with survivor's guilt. Just thinking about, had I actually made it to my friend's office, I might not be here today. Because of those events that day, I constantly think of all the lives lost since then, whether in combat or due to suicide. I still struggle to wonder about what all has transpired. Some things are good as well as the bad, from being deployed to Iraq to even being in Guantanamo Bay for a short period. There are so many things to reflect on as it's tied to 9/11. Every year it is hard as we get closer to the anniversary, remembering those lives lost that day and up until now, civilians, contractors, service members, and third country nationals supporting us. One of the hardest things is constantly seeing coverage for 9/11 and so many things being geared towards New York and the Twin Towers, while the Pentagon barely gets any recognition, and a snippet of Pennsylvania. Yes, New York was the site of the most lives lost, but it was not the only place that day. My hat goes off to all the first responders, firefighters, and police, but they were not the only ones that day. Granted, they do their job in which they, like us, are supposed to do. But what about the others who stepped up to help out? Those are the individuals I would like to see recognized. So much is done to bring attention to the New York firefighters, but what's done for the emergency personnel and staff of the Pentagon? I do not believe we all look to be glorified, but try to make sure others are not left out. We cannot mention one war in history and leave out all the others that were fought. As a military veteran who was in Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom, as well as peacekeeping missions, one thing I personally cannot stand to be called is a hero. I'm told thank you for your service. My response is thank you, or it's an honor. Just please do not call me a hero, as I do not consider myself a hero for taking another's life. I still see it as that was someone else's son, father, brother, husband, loved one. This is my feelings on being called a hero. There are so many things that still frustrate me and depress me as it relates to 9/11, but there are some good things. Some things I see for the better are that I have a child 20 years later who is now in the military serving under something that happened when he was a child. Not only my child being in the military now, but how much the military has opened from letting women into combat arms, as well as those of the LGBT to serve. At one point, so many did not want blacks to serve, and now we have our first Secretary of Defense who is black. The Army now has their first female Secretary of the Army, which is all in support to the defense of this nation. We as a nation still have so far to go, but we have to be willing to listen and learn from one another. I took an oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Let us stay vigilant, as we have had our share of homegrown terrorist groups. I wish we would stop targeting specific groups such as Muslims rather than terrorist ideology, which comes in all races and religions. I am so thankful to have my current wife who has helped me through so many troubled times, as she is my best friend, confidant, venting board, and counselor. It helps so much to have a strong support system. Thank you.
I remember the morning of 9/11, I was actually arming up at Beale Air Force Base. I had about 9 more months of my military service to go, and I was going to get out and go home, go back to Tracy. And then my life had changed forever after that. I spent another 13 years in the United States Air Force and went all around the world, all over the Middle East. I remember in the morning, we were arming up for security for the base, and our commander came running in saying, "We're under attack. We're going to ThreatCon Delta." And we couldn't believe it. You know, we turned on Fox News in the armory, and lo and behold, we saw the second one hit the tower. And I just remember this feeling that came over me, like, oh my God, America's under attack. So we went into defensive posture and locked down the base. Everybody was locked down. The bases were locked down. All the airports were locked down. And then after that, I really took 9/11 personal. And I believe that it was up to me to do something and fight my own, I guess, battle with it. But so many people joined the military after that. So many people enlisted, volunteered, not just with the military, but also volunteered in their communities, which was amazing to see. And even today, as the 20th anniversary of 9/11 it turns into a day of national service. President Obama actually declared 9/11 a day of national service, which I think is just amazing. So you take this horrific tragedy that happened in our nation and turn it into something worth fighting for, something for service, service before self. Pretty much the American spirit of service before self, because that's what we do. And it's good to see it at home in the communities. It's people standing up and helping out their fellow Americans. I think you'll find that there's always been evil in this world, and there always will be evil in this world. But as long as there is a United States of America, as long as we are still united, evil will never prevail.